Yaakov, we finished the first letter. So Siman Aleph here. So I'll just say it in short. This is the mimer in which, famous mimer in which the Alter Rebbe explains why we don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos. And we said that this is a binyanav. It's like it's a general rule from the Alter Rebbe about how things work with Chazal. That not always do they tell us the inner reasoning for things, but rather we only hear the external. So the external is very strange. As say they're afraid of somebody taking the shofar for Dal Adamos and Rishus Harabim. But that's the reason. But so Rav Yitzchak, when he taught this, so he always says, it's like the problem that all the Balei Tshuva have. The Balei Tshuva, they come to Yiddishkeit because of the content. They heard really good content. And they come and they look at the practice and see the practice is on the it's not worth anything. So they always have this discrepancy, this big dissonance between the wonderful spiritual things that they read about, and then the practice looks like it's just a bunch of old people doing, without any feeling, without anything. And it becomes even worse when you're talking about things like shofar. You have this great mitzvah from the Torah, and all Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is just to blow the shofar. And then Chazal come and tell you, no, we don't blow shofar. It's like when you read about the 12 challahs and you come to the Rebbe's table and he only has 2, and you're like, oh, where did the 12 challahs go? And everything's like that. So this is a binyanav of explaining why things have. The big thing in this generation is the tchelis. That they decided that they found the tchelis. They found what the blue string is supposed to be dyed from. In practice, nobody puts it on. Why? Because we don't do that. What do you mean you don't do that? It says in Torah to do it. How can you not do it? So this is a binyanav to understand how this works. So in short, the reason that we don't do it is because it's done by itself. And to understand that, we have to understand why Shabbos by itself does what the shofar does, which is why we don't blow the shofar. Meaning that even for a small reason, such as the Daled Amos and Rishus Harabim, that's enough to say that if there's even such a danger, since it happens by itself anyway, it's better. And this also goes back to a deeper understanding of Chassidus and Kabbalah, that things that happen by themselves are actually at a higher level than things that are willfully done. And because the whole purpose of Chassidus is to bring Torah to such a state that it's natural. It happens by itself. So when you wake up in the morning, I don't know if you finished your mikveh yet, you're supposed to naturally fall into the mikveh. And you're supposed to naturally come out of the mikveh and have tefillin on. And then naturally you daven, you don't even notice, you don't even see. That's the real flow of Yiddishkeit, because it's supposed to be what's called Jewish nature. Okay, so let's go to base. In Aleph, he explained, in order to explain all this, he explains what he explains many times, that there are 2 ways in which Hashem created the world. The one way is that the world is what we call mechanistically evolutionary, meaning that what there is here is like what came out of what the Greeks called the first mover. That's the philosophical language of describing how the world was created, and Chazal adapted it, and the Rambam adapted it, and they all felt that this was a good way of explaining things. That's called En ba'ila ela masha ba'alul. There's only in the effect what was in the cause. There can't be something new in the world. The world is just an extension of the first cause, of the first mover. So that's called En ba'ila ela masha ba'alul. Of course, Hashem on top of that gives us free will, but that's the natural way that the world was created. The second way is the Chiddush of Kabbalah, is the Chiddush of the Arizal, and that's called Islapshus, or enclothement. And here you can't say that what is in the cause is all there is in the effect. Now, how do you explain this? So he says, in our in his time, the best example the Chazal gave for it was the body as an enclosement of the neshama. That the body has the neshama inside of it, but the body is not all that the body is what was in the neshama. In fact, there's two different things entirely. So that you don't have this cause and effect, but it is a cause and effect because the body can't do anything if the neshama is not there. On the other hand, the body is able to do things that the neshama can't do at all. The neshama can't pick anything up. It can't speak. It can't. All its powers are hidden until it comes in contact with the body. So I like to say that in our generation, the easiest way to understand this is electricity, because the electrical appliance or whatever you're using, or the computer, it's entirely different than the power source. There's no connection. The power source doesn't make what the appliance or the device does. On the other hand, you can't have the device working without the power source. So that's an example of islapshus. Okay. So that's what he explained in the first siman, and he also explained that this is the difference between Yehuda Ilah and Yehuda Tata. The person has a consciousness of supernal unification of Da'at, then his feeling is that there is nothing new in the world. Everything is just an extension of the first moment. Everything is just an extension of Hashem. That's the feeling of there's nothing in the effect except for what was in the cause. But a person who has a consciousness, like most of us do, of Yehuda Tata, of the lower unification, so our feeling is not like that. Our feeling is that the world is something very different than the first move. We feel separate. We feel different. Yeah. Where do you feel Yehuda Ilah? When you learn Torah. When you learn Torah, there's a Yehuda Ilah. Then you can feel that there's nothing except for what Hashem. That's the feeling that Talmid Chacham has. He feels that everything, that's what the sages are trying to say. They're trying to say that everything that you're mechadish in the Torah, and the point of learning Torah is to have chidushim, is to have novel ideas and new insights. This was all given already to Moshe Rabbeinu and Sinai. That's a feeling of it. There's nothing in the effect except for what was in the cause. That's Yehuda Ilah. But when you do a mitzvah, the mitzvah is already something else. The mitzvah already feels like a chiddush. Like this wasn't it, because if there was no man, so the mitzvahs would just be ideas. You know, the neshama without the body. We say. Oh, and last thing is that when it's something new, it's called yesh me'ayin. That's the big chiddush. Okay, now we're in base. ולהבין זה בתוספת ביאור, הנה נודע שבחינת המלכות ובחינת הרוממות וההתנסות. So the first part, he explained that for there to be yesh me'ayin, for there to be a feeling of Yehuda Tata, Hashem created Malchus. That's the purpose of this sphere. This sphere is a sphere that, in a sense, disconnects. It disconnects between emanation, between Atzilus, and between the lower worlds, the lower forms of consciousness. For there to be kingdom, there has to be a feeling of being exalted, of being special. Itnasut, to be above. What does it mean? It means that a king can't be a king unless you raise him. It's a well-known fact that at the end of his life, not so much the end, but it probably was around 59, 60 years old. King David was old, even though he passed away 10 years later, but he was already feeling old. When he felt old, the Tanakh says, "Vaychasu bibgadim velo yecham lo." They covered him in clothing and didn't warm him. What do they mean? He's got some kind of diabetic neuropathy. What does he have? What's his problem? So in Chassidus it's explained that his problem was that nothing excited him anymore. When they gave him the clothing, they dressed him up in the garments of a king. It doesn't feel like doing anything. Why? Because he was tired of his failures. He too was tired of his failures at some point. They needed something to pick him up. So eventually they figured it out. And really, the person who really figured it out was Bathsheba. And she brought him Shlomo. And he saw Shlomo, and they bowed down to him, and decided that he'll make Shlomo king even now. He'll say that he's the one who will inherit me. Adoniah taking the kingship didn't help him. If this is everything I built for this guy, I might as well not have done it. But when he saw Shlomo, he was only a 2-year-old child, but he saw that there was something special about this kid. And so it started making it worth it. And what did Bathsheba say when she came into him? She wasn't the first one to say this ever, but probably the first one who really meant it. Yechi HaMelech David le'olam. Like Yechi Adonenu Moreinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach L'olam V'ed. Same idea. They say you give life to the person by saying this to him. And a king needs it as much as anybody else. Okay. So he needs itnasut. He needs to have a feeling that he's above everything. So the same thing goes for Hashem. שבוודאי בבחינת ההתנסות הרי האור מובדל ומרומם בערך והעולמות מקבלים רק מבחינת המלוכה. And what that means is that's what we mean by there's a separation. Because the moment that you exalt the king, the kingdom, then it's above, it becomes a crown. It becomes a crown for everything that's underneath it. But if you don't exalt it, if you only put it down, like who wants to be the leader of a people who only put him down, right? Why? We know what kind of person wants to be a leader in that case. If everybody hates him and nobody cares. Only an autocrat. But a person really wants to serve the people. So he needs the people to feel that there's some value to what he's doing. He needs them to tell him that. If they don't tell him that, then what's the point? And then he takes the crown. Then he can be a Moshe Katu Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim. When are you a melech? When is it Malchutcha? When it's Malchut Kol Olamim. When it becomes the kingdom of all the world. But if it's not the kingdom of all the world, he doesn't want to be a king. And that's what it means when we say that Malchus becomes the crown of, meaning the Atik Yomin. Atik Yomin is the highest part of the crown of the world of Bria, which is underneath it. And so this is what we mean, that there's a separation, and this is what gives the power of there being something new. In other words, the worlds can now do something new because they have a king. It's a very interesting question. Why is it that in Eretz Yisrael today, nobody dreams of anything? Nobody dreams of anything. At most, they can dream, you can dream up a little dream like you have. It's a nice dream, but it's a small dream. There's no dreams about how am I going to change the world. There's no dreams about, there's no dreams of how do I, you might be dreaming of it, but maybe you have a king, we don't know. You put somebody as a king. The point is that there's it's a chicken and an egg question. Can you have great dreams if you don't have a king? Meaning, can you really do something new, like the body can do something new that the soul can't, if there's no kingdom in the middle between the two domains? The domain of the soul is the domain of Atzilus, it's the domain of emanation. The domain of the body is the domain of the creation, formation, and action worlds. But there's nothing in the middle that's separating, in the sense of being higher than all the lower worlds, but the end of all the higher worlds. There's nothing there, there's no king there, then the lower worlds don't do anything new.
It's like a transformer?
Okay. But it's more than transformer. Transformer is just we said when we learned the first siman, this is called in the language of the Arizal en aruch. There's no exchange rate. You can't exchange what's up there. No amount of soul will make 1 gram of body. You can't transfer from one to the other. So it's more than transform. Transform is just a step up, step down. It's not a big deal.
So it's a transformer that transforms something.
Something from nothing.
With something from nothing. But there's no relationship.
En aruch. That's what the Arizal calls it.
It's an en aruch transformer.
In Shara Klalim, that's the big chiddush that Rav Chaim Vital writes. En aruch. Chassidus has something higher than that, but that's the first stage of understanding how something new is created in the world. So you need to have somebody who's a figurehead in that sense, as a king. There has to be, if there was no kingdom in the middle and they would just accept from Zav emanation, Zav Atzilus, if the loving kindness, the way it was by Hashem, would just come down, it wouldn't do much. It would be nothing new. It would just be more of the same. The whole chiddush is that there's a malchus in the middle, that there's a king in the middle.
How would that even? What would the kesher be between Zah of Atzilus to Bria?
There would be a kesher, but it would just be more of the same, like it was before there was malchus. It would just be sort of like, say it another way, that before a guy gets married, he just does more of the same. He can live for a long time in the world, and you see this. You see that there's men who never got married and never had children. So they did more of the same. They do a lot. It's not that they don't do anything. There's a lot of value to it, but it's nothing new. It's just a continuation of what they were when they were 20. It just gets older. But when you have a wife, suddenly it's completely different. There's nothing is the same. You're not the same. Your life is not the same. It's like a whole new world. And in a certain sense, that's what you came for. Yeah, but of course, in that sense, you have to have a king. You have to somehow have a king. So the wife is the king. That's it. But if it was just chesed of Atzilus coming down, chesed of Zah, hayaba b'bchinat kiruv, it would be all near. It would all be the same. Al derech ila ve'alul, like the extension of the cause. We call it a mechanical evolution because it's like billiard balls. The last billiard ball in the whatever you do on the table can only do what the first one did. It's only got as much energy as the first one did, and it can only roll. You can't make the last one jump suddenly. You can make the first one jump, and maybe the second one will jump also, but you can't have the last one suddenly out of nowhere jump. It doesn't. It just rolls. And that's called yesh miyesh. It's very interesting. A lot of people think that if you're in the world of Tzilus, it's much more interesting. It's actually much more boring. Tzilus is boring. It's all the same. Something from something. And that's one of the main things that's not always noted. That Atzilut is yesh miyesh, and only Bria. Why is it called Bria? Because it's yesh mi'ayin. Like the Ramban writes in the beginning of the Chumash, that there's only one word in Hebrew that means many words for creating something. There's only one word that means yesh me'ayin. It says it's bria. It wouldn't be something separate, a true yesh. And bria is the beginning of the true yesh. אך לפי שמקבלים על ידי בחינת המלכות, שבחינת התנסות והסתלקות, נעשה צמצום החיות הנמשך בהם עד שנתעבו בבחינת יש בגבול. Then you see something very interesting, that a lot of times by kingdom there has to be silence before. The big example of this was Rav Yosef, who was blind. And he stood with a goy, and they were waiting to see the king of Babylon, whatever he was. And the guy who saw said, I'll tell you when he comes. He said, no, I'll tell you when he comes. Yeah. And he kept making mistakes. He thought the fanfare and the horses and this and that, and finally it was silent. Then Rabbi Yosef said, now he's coming. Because before the king comes, there has to be silence. What's the idea? It's true that you have to lift him, you have to exalt him, but it always has to be something new. It can't be more of the same. So there has to be istalkut. There has to be a concealment before. There has to be a departure. The old light, like on Rosh Hashanah, the old light from the previous year has to depart. If Hashem is going to be king, if he's going to decide to recreate the world and make something new this year, it won't be more of the same. It will be really Rosh Hashanah, the new head of the year, Rosh Chadash. It's also Rosh Chodesh. It's also Rosh Chadash. If it's really going to be something new, there has to be at night a complete evacuation of the previous light. The previous thoughts about what the world was about, what life was about, they have to disappear. And then Hashem can become king again. Then you can bring the king. That's the silence before. Okay. So there has to be a tzimtzum of the chayus. There has to be a contraction of whatever gave me life before. Until you can have a new purpose. Still, like he said in the first part, it's almost like in yesh mi yesh, the chiddush is free will. That even though in the world of Atzilus they completely feel that they're an extension of godliness, they still receive, a neshama that's a neshama from Atzilus still receives a sachar for its mitzvos. Why? Because he still has free will. So their chiddush, the chiddush for the tzaddikim, is free will. How can it be that even though I'm completely an extension of Hashem, I still get? It's like everything has been predetermined. So how come I get sachar? How come I get a reward for doing a mitzvah? So you get a reward because because there's free will. Because Hashem decided there should be free will. That's the chiddush there. In our world, it's the opposite. The free will is the given. And the chiddush is that there's something called bittul. That everybody feels that they're free to do whatever they want. That's when you're separate and you live in the lower world. Your consciousness is in the lower worlds. The chiddush is that in spite of having free will, a person is willing to do what Hashem tells him. So that's the chiddush in our world is bittul. מכל מקום הם בבחינת ביטול העין, שהיא המלכות. So the ayin here is the malchus. כי וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים. As far as we're concerned, the ayin for us, seeing the ayin is seeing the king, seeing the kingdom. ומחמת אימת מלכות דאצילות נעשה בחינת ביטול היש. And because for us the malchus of Atzilus is like the representative of everything that's above, and so we have bitul yesh. Only here there's yesh. Only here there's something separate, something that feels separate. So bitul only has real meaning here. For the tzaddik, bitul doesn't mean anything. It's a given. It's how he is. So that's what it means that we accept this kingdom with we want it, with will. Just like the mitzvah in the Torah to appoint a king, is that it has to be from your own will and from your own consciousness. You can't call it dominion or sovereignty if the people don't accept it. They don't accept the yoke of this kingdom. So he tells us here the difference in what Yosef wanted and what his brothers thought he wanted. Yosef wanted to be king. He wanted them to accept him, and they said, "No, we don't accept it. Do you want to be a ruler, a moshel?" That he didn't want. Shemoshel ba'al kolchan. He wanted to be a king. You have to decide, because if you really want to be our king, you have to wait till we accept you. Not for you to have dreams about how you're going to be king. ולכן בראש השנה, שאז נברא האדם הראשון, what happened on Rosh Hashanah? Adam Rishon, the first man, was created. What does it mean? שהוא בעל בחירה, that he has free will. And he accepted וקיבל עול מלכותו יתברך ברצון. He didn't blow the shofar, apparently. He just accepted Hashem's kingdom, his sovereignty. אז נתגלה מידת מלכותו יתברך. Then Hashem became king. Because as we know, אין מלך בלא עם. There can't be a king without a people. מה שאין כן קודם בריאת אדם הראשון, that's why we call Rosh Hashanah on the 6th day. זה היום תחילת מעשיך. Why is this the beginning of the... Because תחילה here means that at this moment, when you created man, there really became a yesh mi'ayin. Everything before man was a yesh mi'yesh. Relatively speaking, everything except for man does not have enough free will at its base to really be considered a separate creation. So the real separate creation began with the creation of Adam. Before man was created, there were only animals and beasts. They don't have free will. And therefore, and therefore Hashem could not yet be king. There was no malchus, so he wasn't king. So they're all interconnected. Yesh me'ayin, free will, malchus, Hashem being melech, all connected. That's why we renew the kingship on Rosh Hashanah, on the 6th day of creation. The awakening from below of bitul haratzon lemidat malchuto yitbarach lekabel malchuto beratzon. So we awaken from below to nullify our free will to accept His kingdom, and we want it. This awakens above me'or lemala b'chinat haratzon ha'elyon b'midat hamelucha. So he feels like he wants to be king also. And what does it mean that he wants to be king? That he has a new order. As he ascends the throne, he says, okay, the world is now a different place. Everything that was is over. Now I have new ideas. And this is all because at the end of the previous year, everything was mistalek. Everything disappeared, went back to its source. It was complete silence. There's no decrees anymore. It's like the king is out. And you have to convince him to come back to be a king. Maybe I skipped a little bit. This is what's called making the crown of kingdom. Okay, Adua. So now we'll skip the parentheses. Okay. Uviur advarim. At the end of it's like about the 12th, 13th line. The last word on the line was uviur advarim, after the parentheses. הנה על דרך משל בנפש האדם אנו רואים שבכל מידותיו אין עיקר התפשטותם תלוי רק על פי הרצון והתענוג המלובש בהם. It's a very important concept in Kabbalah that the appearance or the extension of the midos, of the emotive faculties of the heart, depends on the person having will and pleasure before. What do we mean? Usually the understanding is that a person will not extend effort, extend his heart, unless he beforehand had a picture of all the pleasure that he'll receive from what he's going to do. Nobody's going to move. Same thing with the will. He has to. Sometimes there's no pleasure in it. Sometimes it's just will. A lot of the stuff that people do, they go to work, they're extending themselves, but they only do it because of what they know they're going to get at the end of the day, at the end of the 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is. So that's only will. But sometimes they also have pleasure in it. When they have pleasure in it, that's a chush, we call it. It means that they also have what would you say? They have a knack for it. It's not just that they want to go there, they know what they're doing. But nobody will do anything for real unless it starts in the ratzon and in the ta'anug. And those are the two parts of the keter. The two parts. Really, what he's saying here is that when we're giving Hashem a keter, we're awakening, as it were, His will and His pleasure from being king. That's what we said before about King David, that when Bathsheba came with Shlomo, he saw the pleasure that he would receive from this child. And so it became worthwhile for him to be king. So now, okay, now I'll wear the crown.
Well, I mean, Tanag would be more like... Before you're talking about Ratzon as being more like Atzik, but really isn't Ratzon more like Arach and Tanag is more like Atzik?
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about how the Tanag is...
Malchus, when it comes down, it's first Atik. Yeah, he made it simple in the beginning. He didn't talk about the Tanuk so much. I sort of talked about it a little bit, but not. He didn't mention it until then.
Because the Tainug of how does it work again? The Tainug would be Malubash
inside the Arik.
In the has a chesed of
in Vura Avatik.
Yeah.
So we have to awaken this in him. Even though we have a nature to do good. If you're good, you have a nature to do good. מכל מקום, אם אין רצונו מסכים את בהטבת והשפעת החסד זה, מטעמו הכמוס, if a person didn't think in the beginning about why he wants to do this good, and usually that reason is concealed, and he says here, kamus, sometimes it's even concealed from the person himself, לעלות כך ברצונה, לא ישפיע כלל. He won't go out of his way to extend goodness. וכמו כן, במידת המלוכה לפניו ידבר, שבחינת ההתנסות על זולתו, תלוי ברצון המאציל ברוך הוא. Here again he says just a ratzon, but he means also there needs to be tainug there. You can already see where this is going, because he didn't mention the tainug until now, because he didn't want to get into the Shabbos part. Now he's getting into the Shabbos part. Because he says, what is Shabbos? Shabbos is, what do we call Shabbos? What's the description? Az titanag al Hashem. Shabbos is all tanug. So if the point is really, if we would need to divide into two parts, and we would have to say like this, that the shofar itself is the kli, but the kli is not there's a simple halacha. If you steal a sukkah, you can't sit in it. If you steal a lulav, you can't bench on it. If you steal tefillin, you can't dan them. Anything you steal, you can't do the mitzvah. If you steal a shofar, it's fine. You can blow it, and that's fine. What's the difference? So the difference is that the mitzvah is not the shofar. In all the previous things that we said, the mitzvah is the object itself. But in the shofar is not the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is the sound. The sound that it produces. And sound you can't steal. That's what the Gemara says. So you can't steal sound. You're yotze. It's not, you shouldn't do it, but because you still stole the shofar. But the sound that you produce with the shofar is fine. It's a very interesting chiluk. So the shofar itself is not. So the shofar itself is not the issue in the mitzvah. The real point is the sound that you make. So we could say like this, that the shofar is a problem on Shabbos. Because you can't, maybe you'll take it. But that's not the point. The point was really to blow the shofar, to make the sound. So it's not that the Shabbos comes instead of the shofar. The Shabbos comes instead of the sound. That's trickier to. How would Chazal say? I'm trying to think this through. How would they say? You don't need on Shabbos to blow the shofar, but you can blow the shofar. You can have the shofar. That's not the problem. The problem is that the sound that it makes, that the Shabbos makes anyway. That's the sound of Shabbos. Where do we see the sound? Before Shabbos starts, the most important mizmor that we say at night, Kol Hashem B'koach, the 7 sounds in the chapter that we stand up. That chapter is ancient. What was?
So that's, I mean, in Israel, before Shabbos starts, you have the siren, but the
right.
for that, we used to blow shofar.
Right, they used to blow the shofar.
It's fair of Shabbos.
Right. And somebody connected it actually this year. I saw somebody starting to talk about it. That every Shabbos there's already a bchina of a sound. But in general, what's the idea? The idea is that sound is ta'anug without physical. It's pleasure, but it's even more than music. Even though music we also put in ta'anug, we also put it there. But this is a primordial type of music. It's a primordial sound, or primal they call it, whatever. It's even the sound before sound. So that Shabbos has. So it's not the shofar that's the problem really, but how would you say you can blow the shofar but you can't make sounds? That's really what they wanted to say. That's what Chazal were saying. You can blow the shofar, but there's no need to, because the sound is already there. We hear the same thing about the world to come. What's going to happen in the world to come? We're going to hear the shofar blowing and not stopping. The sound is here all the time. It's just that we're not connected to it. But the world to come is called Yom Shekulo Shabbat. It's a day that's all Shabbos. So that sound is there anyway.
7G.
Why go so far? Maybe it's 4G is enough. You don't need more than that. From an engineering perspective, 5G is idiots engineering. It's not real engineering, because what does it do? Instead of using your bandwidth in a better way, the easiest thing in the world is just to get more bandwidth. That's not smart. That's just a stupid way to do it. The brute force method. That's not how you do things. If you're smart, you can make something like Voyager, that on 20 watts it can still talk to Earth. You don't need more. You really don't need more. The problem is that it's much easier to have higher frequencies and to all this nonsense, more bandwidth. So really the sound is here anyway. That's what he's saying. That's what he's going to say. The oneg, the pleasure, is here anyway on Shabbos. You're not adding anything by blowing the shofar.
But on a regular Rosh Hashanah that's not Shabbos, it's not.
Right? Then you need to add that sound. That sound, that primal sound that actually is not even heard. Right? It's a custom in Chabad to learn the mimer Kol HaPnima of Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar, where the Alter Rebbe discusses what is this inner sound that can't be heard physically, but every person has inside of him. It's the same thing in the soul. They say that they hardly allowed, in Yerushalmi it says, B'koshi yitiru ledaber b'Shabbat. Hardly they allowed us to speak on Shabbos. Meaning all speech was supposed to have been just the laning and the davening. And you weren't supposed to be allowed to speak, pass me the salt on Shabbos. Why? Because if there's any sound that you're going to make, it's a sound that's already there. What's the sound that's already there? The sound that's on Shabbos is the sound of Torah. It's the sound of holiness. The same thing exists in the person. I also have an inner sound that I can't express. It says that Reb Hillel used to explain music, because he was a big Bal Menagin. So Reb Hillel Parcher used to say that into the world searching for his nigun. He has a nigun that he knows from when the soul was a soul. And he goes through life trying to find it. And really what does he mean? He means that you have an inner nigun that you're trying to find. You're trying to express it. Liba lepuma logalia, it's called. But the heart doesn't reveal it to the... And this all depends on pleasure. I'll say something more. He doesn't say this all he says it in... You have to know the sugya. There's a whole question, what controls what? So usually in the Tanya only goes one stage. He says, Mach shalita lelev. The mind controls the heart. But then, in other places, he says, Pnimiut alev shalita lemoach. But there's the inner aspect of the house called Reuta deliva, which controls the mind. But he said, I don't know where he said it, where the Alter Rebbe said it, but Reb Isaac and Reb Hillel heard it. Reb Isaac either from him directly, and Reb Hillel from Reb Isaac maybe. And they have this pnimiyut al-moach shalit al pnimiyut alev, that the inner aspect of the mind controls the inner aspect of the heart. So I don't know, do you get the newsletter every week? You don't get it. All the stuff I write all week long, you don't enjoy it.
You can get it.
You get it? You don't. So look at this. Look at the one, the final showdown. So Rav Yitzchak talked about it this week. That 51 is the final showdown because it's equal to Yisrael Amalek, Israel and Amalek. And what does Hashem want to do to Amalek? Once they're ready, he's been wanting for a long time. So why doesn't he do it? Because Mach Shalit Alarev. Because Hashem also has a brain and mind tells him it's not the right time yet. Why? Because if you eradicate him now, and the world is not yet rectified, who's gonna the soul shabaisa? Who's going? It's like a woman who's baking bread, and you wait. If you don't wait long enough for the shmarim, how do you say shmarim? For the yeast to rise. The yeast makes the bread rise. If you don't wait long enough, it's not going to be airy. It's not going to be good. So you have to let the yeast work. Amalek is the yeast. On the other hand, Pnimius Halev controls the mind. So he has this urge all the time. He wants to eradicate it. From time to time, he almost doesn't control himself. But the inner aspect of the mind controls the inner aspect of the heart even. So what's the inner aspect of the mind? That's called Atik. That's Tanuk. He says, really in the end, I won't get any pleasure from eradicating Amalek now. It's not just about...
If the water's too hot, you kill the yeast.
Yeah. You have to let it work. And in the end, it's about the pleasure. That's really why I extended myself to create the world. So if there won't be this rectification, but this year, he said, that's it. Shnat Geulai Ba. This is the year of redemption when the moach, pnimiut moach shalit al pnimiut halev. So anyway, so all this is here in Gimel. There it should be just for Zeu Inyan Rosh Hashanah. You have Gimel there, or I didn't print you enough? So it's just before. Zeu Inyan. So it's just before. Found it? Just before. Zeu Inyan. I think I see it from here. Zeu Inyan. Keep going up. Go. A little bit more. See it? Zeu Inyan. Zeu Inyan Rosh Hashanah. No. Where his finger is.
I think it's probably on the...
Yeah.
I think it's probably... Where's the page? It's probably page 2.
It's not it. It's not what it is. Oh, so you don't have more of it.
No, he does. It just was on the... It was further up than he thought.
וזהו עניין ראש השנה. שנה הוא בחינת מלכות. The year in general is Malchus. Why? Because all time is Malchus. Malchut, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malchus. Right? What really separates? I like to quote this a lot. That Rav Steinsaltz told me once. I've never seen it inside, but so I quote it in his name because I haven't seen it. He says the Malbim somewhere writes that the biggest difficulty the neshama has when it departs the body is to get used again to not having time. There's time, but there's no linear time the way we have it. So for us, I know what I'm doing next. The neshama doesn't know what to do next because there's no next.
So if there's no linear time, if you say that the ikar of Rosh Hashanah is sound sounds like a physical expression of time because sound is basically a vibration.
Okay, we're talking about the sound before.
In hertz, right? So, so if you have no time, you can have no sound.
Yeah.
So, so then if you talk about...
So it's just a continuous sound.
If you talk about the time before time, non-linear time, what would a non-linear sound be like? What would a non-linear sound like?
Try to make one. Pshat would be that it's like it's sight, not sound. That's what you say, that Adam Rishon saw from, we don't say he heard, we say he saw from the beginning of the world to the end of the world. Because sight can take everything in at the same time. So sight is usually used as an example of not having time. So the year, Shana Ubchinat Malchut, that's Malchus.
So in Chabad, they're makbid to try to see the shofar also. Maybe that's why. Mm-hmm. I never heard that until this year. I always thought the ikar was hearing it. That you're supposed to try to look at the shofar, but maybe that's because they want you to try to see.
I know. Shana Ubchinat Malchut, v'Rosh Hashanah inu galgalta v'keter shebemalchut, and the head of the year is the skull of the, is the crown of the Malchus, the crown of the sphere. ואין מזה בפירוש הרמז פרשת תצא, וזהו עניין תחילת מעשיך. כי המלכות היא בחינת עשייה שבאצילות. That's why we call it the beginning of your actions, because Malchus is the beginning of, is called the עשייה of אצילus. בתחילת מעשיך היינו כתר דנוקבה, שהוא בתחילת בחינת עשיינה. וזיכרון ליום ראשון, יש לומר, דהיינו כתר הכללי. Why is it a memory of the first day? Because there's also a general keter, not just the keter of Malchus. And that's called Bchinat Arich and Pin. And that's called Arich in general. שנקרא יום ראשון שלמעלה מההשתלשלות, ראש המבואר סוף דיברו מתחיל ביום השמיני עצרת. I don't know what he says there. והיינו שמלכות שבכתר נמשך להיות כתר שבמלכות. So out of the malchus of crown, the kingdom of crown. So that's a beautiful explanation of what it means, זיכרון ליום ראשון. ואין בעץ חיים שער האריך אנפין, סוף פרק ב', המלכות דאריך אנפין, שורשה למעלה מתשע ספירות דאריך אנפין עצמה. The malchus, in Arich, there's only 9 sfirot. There's no keter. Arich itself doesn't have a keter. He starts from Chokhmah. Sorry, opposite. Arich doesn't have a malchus. So where's his malchus? So he says there in Eitz Chaim that it's above actually all the 9 sfirot. That's why you don't see it. Ela mibchinat, it's the atik actually. It's the higher part of the crown. And it's all to explain what it means. Zeu zikaron liyom rishon. ואין משהו בפירוש המילות, הפסוק ממך לא קיים מלך. This is part of some kind of long parentheses. I didn't put that in. Why didn't I see this? I don't know. כי הנה ראש השנה, this is what I... When did the parentheses start? Maybe they're missing the square brackets.
This sound like
This is just brackets. Why? כי הנה ראש השנה זהו היום תחילת מעשיך, זיכרון ליום ראשון, ועל כן נקרא ראש השנה ראש גילוי יכולות דרך כללות על כל השנה. And actually it gives the life force for the rest of the year, like we said, because it makes all the plans. It's that he wants to be king now. וכוח זה ניתן לישראל, אותם מקבלים מלכותו יתברך ברצון. And this power was given to Am Yisrael because we accept his yoke of his kingdom with will. מה שאין גם מבחינת שנקרא מושל. But if you just accept him as you have no other choice, you're coerced into it, so he's not a king, he's just a ruler. And that was בכל דור ודור, אפילו דור המדבור ודור בלגה, שמרדו בהשם, מכל מקום, מלכותו בכל משלה. And in every generation, there was somebody who accepted Hashem as king. But in the generations that were against Hashem, like Dora Mabu and Dora Plaga, so they did not accept his kingdom. So what does it say there? Malchuto b'kol mashala. That even in those generations he was a ruler, but he wasn't a king. ובחינת ממשלה בעל כורחם. ולכן אפילו בלעם אמר לא אוכל לעבור את פי השם. כי רוח המושל עליו, it's very interesting, because what does Bilam use? Mishalim. So that's the difference between Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the difference. Even though Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu have the same level of prophecy, Bilam can't see what Moshe Rabbeinu sees. Everything he sees as a metaphor. He sees it as a parable. So he has to interpret. He still has to interpret. It's always troubled me. If you say that Bilam, that Hashem gave the nations of the world a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu, so how come he didn't write a book like Moshe Rabbeinu? We have his book. Moshe Rabbeinu put it into the Chumash. All of Parashat Balak. It didn't happen with Moshe Rabbeinu. He just brought it in. He copied it from somewhere, or Hashem told him. Again, he copied it from Hashem. And this is what happened with Bilam. And Bilam, all he can do is say parables. So he's like all the other prophets. What's the difference? How is he like Moshe Rabbeinu? I don't get it. He says it. Really, he's like Moshe Rabbeinu. He was able to see what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. But because he doesn't accept him, doesn't accept Hashem as his king willfully, so he can't see literally. He has to see through a parable, through a mashal, because that's what mashal means. Mashal is that you accept unwillfully. But Moshe Rabbeinu is such bittul that it's all with his will, all his will is subjected to Hashem. So he sees exactly what Hashem says.
Moshe Rabbeinu was native.
Okay. It's a native speaker.
It's native.
It's his mother tongue.
Yeah.
And by Bilam, it's a translation. Yeah, very good. It's sort of like full stack. ולכן אפילו בלעם אמר לא אוכל לעבור את פי השם, כי רוח המושל עליו יעלה, בעל כורחו. And it forces him to prophesize. And by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's willfully, whenever he wants. אבל להיות נקרא בשם מלך לקבל ברצון נעשה על ידי עושי רצונו דווקא. This is done by the Jewish people. והנה, ג' והנה כל המשכת עונג ורצון עליון במידה נמוכה מכל התענוגים הוא על ידי השופר שהוא שלהם. So all the tainug that we give Hashem from the shofar, it's from the shofar, blowing into shofar. Why do we blow a shofar from an animal? Why can't we do it with the chatzotzot? Why can't it be with the trumpets? Why? The source of the soul of the animal is very high. It's in the divine chariot. It's all from the world of Tov before. מקום נפילתם היה בעולם הבריאה, והן המרכבה, and so on. This all came from the world of chaos. It fell down into the chariot, and then it became the soul of the animals. ולכן טבע הבהמה בחינת ביטול גדול יותר מהאדם. And that's why the animal is more nullified. It's like from Atzilus, like we said. The animal's nature is to be batal to Hashem. Why? Because האדם יש לו דעת מעולם התיקון, והבהמה הוא למטה מן הדעת. לכן תוקים בשופר של בהמה, just reading a little bit more, דווקא שיש בה בחינת ביטול יותר. So we have more bittul. And the bittul, like we said, is what gives the tainug. Is that Hashem created something separate, and it's able to nullify itself so much that it's like it's making the sound of an animal. It's not making the sound of a human. Now he's going to explain that. Because if we would blow trumpets, it would be like the sound of a human. But we blow an animal's horn because that is a more primal, more primordial sound. So I'm skipping a couple of lines. This is already the mimer that we talked about. Tiku v'chodesh shofar. There's kol adibur and there's kol pashut. Since we don't have much time, so I'll just summarize. That the kol adibur, that's the speech that we have. That's the normal human sound, and that has free will in it. In fact, the main thing that makes us free is our speech. Freedom of speech is more important than any other type of freedom. Really, when you take away a person's freedom of speech, it's much worse than taking away his freedom of what do they call it? Congregation, or freedom of tasuka, freedom to work where he wants. If you don't let a person speak, it's the worst thing in the world. It's also with children, it's the same thing. You don't have to let him do what he wants, but you have to let him speak what he wants. If you take away the person's freedom of speech, you're taking away him. But before the freedom of speech, before the speech is also a primordial sound. And that comes from the inner recess of the heart. And that, on Shabbos, is done by itself. That we don't, and that's in Dalet, so we won't read Dalet, but the simple thing is that Shabbos always has this sound in it. It's built into Shabbos. And so you don't need to, in fact, you would just ruin it if you would blow the shofar. So, I'll leave it like this.